right, welcome back everybody to our final session of the day. Thanks for hanging in there. We're going to close out today's sessions with a panel on cybersecurity strategy, moderated by Jeremy. So I'll hand over to him and he can get started.
Great. Thanks, and welcome to the last panel of the day. We realize we're the only thing standing between you and perhaps a nice beverage on the outside, so we'll try and keep things entertaining. So I'm Jeremy Grant, Managing Director of Technology Business Strategy with Venable. We got a great panel who's going to all introduce themselves in a minute, but just to give a quick introduction, today's panel is on Buzzword or solid cybersecurity strategy, considerations for zero trust implementation. And look, we've been talking about this, I think, a good chunk of the day today already. In fact, I was on this very seat just a couple hours ago moderating a session with a couple of folks from the White House about the federal government zero trust strategy. I think we'll touch a little bit on that, but really want to talk about more what's happening commercially and discuss as guidance and regulations that we've been talking about earlier, the role of phishing-resistant authentication, as all of this is actually being wrapped up in implementations. If perhaps you're with an organization that's trying to think about where to start, let's get started. So to start things off, I'm going to ask everybody to just briefly introduce themselves and answer two questions. One, zero trust is a term that's very widely used in the cybersecurity space, and I would often say misused and abused in the cybersecurity arena, because now that it's the cool buzzword, everything needs to be zero trust. So would love to know how you individually define what it means without talking for 10 minutes. And then also on the misuse side of the coin, I want to hear the most absurd zero trust product you've seen marketed to date.
So my name is Christine Owen. I'm a director at Guidehouse. My focus is on enterprise identity and access management solutions and helping my clients get a strong IAM posture and also zero trust, unfortunately. Years ago, I actually hated this word the most, and now here I am having to use it the most as well. So for me, zero trust is essentially a very strong IAM backbone coupled with micro-segmentation and then IT modernization. Everything else is essentially the same cybersecurity model that most organizations should be using. I was trying to I used to find all of these really good, oh my God, how is that zero trust products? I couldn't find one because I think Google has messed up my algorithm and now I get real stuff. And the only thing I could think of was perhaps it's me. I don't know, because I feel like I'm out here talking about zero trust way too much, so.
Well, hi everyone. Let's see. Hi everyone, my name is Jeremiah Mason. I'm the Senior Vice President of Product at AuthID, and we're focused on multi-factor authentication, or what we like to call human factor authentication. I'd say for zero trust, it definitely is a very loaded term, that's used way too much. I didn't have any really good anecdotes. I think for me, my biggest pet peeve is actually when multi-factor that's not phishing resistant calls itself zero trust, right? I mean, this is the complete opposite, right? You can't really say you're helping with zero trust when you can't even do the basics when you're still on legacy architecture. So that's probably one of the biggest things for me. Oh, and I skipped. What do I actually call zero trust, right? So for me, zero trust it's really a journey, right? It's a path that we're going down. We want to get there. You're not going to get there just with one point solution. It's really a collection of solutions. It's how are the products working together. IAM and MFA are the key components of that backbone. And it's how do you put that together to really minimize your attack surface within your network.
Nice. So I'm Brian Martin, Vice President of Product Architecture at Gradient Technologies. And we're working on another key piece of zero trust, which is platform identity. So bringing user identity plus platform identity together, which is part of my definition of zero trust. Right user, right platform, right operation, right reason, right data. So making sure all those things are correct. Ronald Reagan had it in the 80s, trust but verify. Throw out the trust, now it's just verify. And I did find, maybe not the most absurd, but I did find the most awesome zero trust product out there. It's a new band in New York, New Jersey, just formed last year, called Zero Trust. And very appropriately, they call themselves experimental hardcore, which is everything true about zero trust.
I'm going to use that sometime. This actually reminds me, because I'm thinking about all of the cybersecurity vendors who would love to hire this band to play their show.
Oh my gosh,
Yep.
I mean, they're certainly going to be booked all week at the RSA conference next spring.
Yes.
Although it does remind me, there was, I think it was 5 years ago at RSA. Sorry, we're going to, like I said, this is the last panel before drinks, so we're going to go off.
I asked for drinks for this panel.
You did, and
Got turned down?
Turned
didn't
down.
happen. Sorry, where was I? A bunch of cybersecurity companies rented out a club and hired some band to play who maybe I should have known, but I didn't. And they weren't that good. But the guy, there were two problems with it. One was the guy decided to jump into the crowd, and now we're getting way off track. So
Okay.
What was the second problem?
Sorry.
Wait,
Well,
were you crushed by him? Now I
Was
need
that
to
a
know.
zero trust fall?
I'm going to stick the landing on this in just a minute. So, I mean, I've got, back in the 90s, some punk rock roots that we can talk about another time over drinks. But in the old days, you would just jump off the stage into the crowd. But instead, he did something I've never seen before, which is he brought out like an inflatable mattress and asked people to hold it up and then jumped onto the mattress. But it wasn't that big of a crowd. And keep in mind, it's a cybersecurity conference. And the real problem, speaking of where he should have had zero trust, was that the spindly arms of all of the cybersecurity geeks were not capable of holding up the mattress. And so he jumped onto it, and everybody was like, ow, I'm weak. And he stumped, and he went head first onto the floor and cracked his head open and was taken away in an ambulance, which
much
would
for
have
the
been
mattress.
the least punk rock way to die ever. Dying because you jumped off the stage at a cybersecurity conference and nobody could hold you.
So many analogies.
Yeah, so that's now the worst zero trust analogy that's out there. Getting back to things. Sorry, we went there. I kind of had to riff on that. Talking about identity, and it's not we talk a lot. Obviously, we're at an authentication conference. We're at an authentication conference where people kind of get the importance of phishing-resistant authentication. But zero trust isn't just about the authentication layer. It really is about very sort of identity forward, looking at different layers of IAM. Why is it so important, and what are some of the other considerations beyond just getting authentication right that people need to think about?
Well, I'll just go back and say, the two key pieces there, authentication, knowing the identity of the users of the platform, but also authorization. So authentication, authn, authorization, authZ, bringing those together. I think there's a great company coming up called New Zealand, just to bring N and Z together. But those are two key elements that have to hang together for this to work, because it's about access control.
Yeah, I'd agree. For me, I look at it as identity and access management drives the bus. Right? If you think about like school bus, right? It's driving the bus. You have MFA on there, it's keeping all the kids in control. And really the kids that you have on there, you got your PAM, you got your microsegmentation, you got your PIV, you got EDR, all these other things. And they all come back to identity and MFA to make sure, hey, should I allow this person to come in? Or should I allow this access, right? We have them in our network to segment people off, but at the end of the day, what do they fall back to? Our IAM systems and our multi-factor authentication, right? So you really need to make sure that those two things are top notch, or else all the other solutions that you put in place, it's kind of a waste of effort, right? You're still going to let the threat actors through.
I also like to add device-level signals or device authentication on top of human authentication so that we can have that extra layer of trust on top of it.
Have you seen, how have you seen some of that implemented? Do folks sort of get what it means to have sort of a holistic approach to identity and access management, or in the things that you're seeing, are people sort of picking different pieces and parts and sort of saying we did it but haven't really gotten there yet?
I'd say it's the latter, right? I see a lot of people that kind of like, oh, I got the PAM, so I'm good, right? No, not really, right? But I think right now there's a lot of vendors out there that are trying to do the right things and provide the leadership to everyone else, saying, hey, don't just think about the user, think about the device. And it's more than just those two. It's also what's the posture of the device when authentication is occurring, right? Does the device have an MDM on it? Does it have antivirus? Is it safe at this point in time? If so, then allow the authentication to come through. And then there's also that aspect of, well, do you know who the user is, right? Not just the device, but let's have more assurance of, is this really this user behind the device at this point in time?
So for organizations who are implementing either IAM and or zero trust programs, I've seen a couple things. One thing I see is in larger organizations, they break out the IAM stats to like authentication and PAM and all these other, like for IGA. And the problem with that is if you don't have someone overarchingly looking at that program and making sure that they're moving together in synchronicity, then you're not going to get a strong overarching IAM program. Putting it in silos isn't going to work. And then if an organization wants to migrate to Zero Trust, you have to take that whole IAM stack, plus your network, plus EDR, and whatever other things that you want to add to your Zero Trust architecture. And all of those different groups have to work together. So collaboration is key when it comes to Zero Trust.
Right. And I think Gartner calls it cyber mesh. Right? Cyber mesh, making sure everything works together, which right now I think it's getting a bit better. It's still pretty fragmented, but I think OIDC and other technologies help make it easier where you can start having that interconnectivity.
Right, laying that security across all components in that infrastructure. We do have a number of customers looking at sort of the context awareness. So when we talk about the device and the device posture and making sure the right person on the right device, especially in areas with elevated privilege, they say it's important to know that, if you're controlling billions of dollars of funds or really important information, to make sure that that person is on a known device, whereas we don't want to prevent a student from being able to get their homework in because they have to use the parent's laptop. So context matters in these things. So a lot of good questions, and I'd say, looking at how to implement, nobody's really got it down.
Yeah, right. So I wanted to dig into that next on the implementation side. Each of you are involved with a number of clients who are evolving their security approach to embrace Zero Trust. Can each of you talk about some of the things your clients are doing and like what is and isn't working, what's easy for them and what's hard?
Sure. So I think some of the cool things that our clients are doing is they're actually taking an adaptive approach to authentication. So one of the things we specialize in is that for the front door, we use FIDO2 to get in. We're all about low friction. If you have high friction, users do what? They circumvent and they don't adopt. So they use that to get in the front door. But then when we talk about privilege and escalation, and I want to go and do this highly privileged action, we then step up afterwards, right? So we understand for this particular action, let's step up to something much higher and make sure that it is that user, but then do a different factor than what they use for the front door. Our CTO likes to say it's, a lot of times MFA can be like putting chocolate on top of chocolate, right? You're just getting the same exact thing over and over again. So we try to make sure that as we step up, we're introducing other factors into that authentication to make sure that we are raising the assurance and not just saying, well, give me an SMS to the device that I already authenticated that I'm still not sure it's really you, right?
Or the device I'm actually using to do the operation, right? I get the loopback comes in one device, the operation's happening on a different device.
Exactly.
Device. So we see, looking at stopping lateral movement. Lateral movement of credentials is a big issue. So our customers are looking for ways to anchor credentials to specific devices, to make sure that if a credential is stolen, despite best efforts, when it gets somewhere else, it's not useful. So how do we do that?
So for me, I think for us, for what I do, it's a lot of change management as well. So we go in and we do large scale implementations, and that's really great. But if our general users don't know how to use it, or if the admins don't know how to fix it, it's really not helpful. So it's a lot of training the trainers and training our organization's users to be able to know how to use step-up authentication when it's necessary, or understand why a step-up authentication was asked for at the time. I mean, generally there's a reason and it makes sense for us, but not necessarily to them.
Exactly.
What would you say is the hardest thing for clients, or what's the thing that they want to do that just doesn't work right now?
Two questions there, two answers there.
I know.
Let's just stick with what's hard.
The hardest thing right now is just wrapping their heads around the whole problem. This problem touches every aspect of their environment, users, devices, network, applications, cloud, on-prem. It's a lot to try to wrap your head around.
I'd say it's the why. It's the motivation. Like, they got a lot of other problems going on as well, and a lot of times they think, well, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing, right? It's MFA. It's same acronyms. I'm still doing the right thing, and I feel like that's been one of the hardest things, is helping people understand that, you know, the legacy MFA that you are using isn't actually, you know, fitting the bill. Here's what phishing resistance means. Here's what, you know, biometrics mean. Here's how you implement it. And I think that's been, from what we've seen, to be one of the biggest challenges, is the whole do nothing.
Yeah, I think on top of all of that, some of the challenges is just like you're basically touching on basic education, and I think the problem is that when I talk to people in different organizations, they get very scared when it comes to identity and access management. They go, "Oh, that's really scary. I don't know how to do that." Network guys have said this to me, and I'm like, "I don't understand networks." So, like, hello.
Well, I think it's a very large project. It'll take a very long time to implement, right?
That's exactly right, and to them it's like this foreign thing, right. And because zero trust is so important, IAM is so important to get to zero trust, they think that, like, I don't know. They sometimes think I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm like, I am not. Like, this is very simple, I think. But I think that the issue is that we just don't have enough practitioners out there to be able to teach this to other people and to be able to explain it at a very basic level, because it needs to be demystified, I think, in a better scenario.
I was thinking those exact same words, right? Demystify the authentication. That it's actually pretty simple once you get down to it on how to do it, right? It's integration with the other different products in the environment. Dropping into an IAM and adding on stronger MFA is a relatively solved problem. It's pretty easy to do, right?
Yeah, every domain has their own solution. You were talking about network engineers, right? In networking world, it's Radius, right? And everyone else is like, I don't even know what that is. So a lot of domain-specific language terminology we run into. Different groups see it differently. Everyone has a different definition of security, different definition of zero trust, a different why that they're trying to solve for. How do we bring that together? Again, I like demystify. Yes. How can we demystify and simplify zero trust?
That's what we should call it now. Let's change the title.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I look at, you know, some of the core components. You know, zero trust. I want to understand, as a device manager, what I know about the device. I can implement MDM. That's something that's easy to implement. I need strong authentication to know who the person is that's coming in. I can implement MFA. It may be hard, but it's still easy to implement. Authorization. Does anybody know how to do that well?
I actually was going to talk about that because 800-207 talks about essentially ABAC, attribute-based access control, so that's authorization. And I honestly believe that is the piece when someone's reading through Zero Trust and they get to that ABAC piece, they go, oh, I'm out, I'm done. I don't know what else to do. This doesn't make any sense. I'm gone. So I think that, and that's where we need to demystify, right? That's where we need to really go out and teach people, okay, it's not as hard as it seems. It's a little more complicated than role-based, but it's not that, and like here are all the tools to be able to do this well, and this is why it helps you, and it actually streamlines a lot of MFA, right?
Yes.
It reduces friction to most general users if you have it implemented properly.
I think the fundamental difference between RBAC and ABAC is moving from static to dynamic.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges in MFA and in identity is letting go of static credentials, long-lived credentials, and replacing them with short-lived, ephemeral, frequently rotating credentials. And ABAC's the same thing on the authorization side. And it's scary.
Yes.
Let me ask you about, you said you're focused on the platform side. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about it. I was talking with Jeremiah earlier about this. So you meet somebody and they say something and then they say, trust me. And exactly, everyone's reaction is to laugh. If I say trust me, you're like, oh hell no, why? And yet every day we boot up our devices, they go through their whatever they go through, and then they say, trust me. And we do. Why? So we're focused on the verify. So we did the, throw out the trust, verify everything. Our focus is verifying the devices, make sure they are who they say they are what they say they are, not to be able to identify specific devices, but to be able to know with as much certainty as possible their posture. There's a lot of things an operating system will report to you. What parts of that can you trust? What parts of that are easy to hack? How do I establish confidence that the device has a fingerprint as trustworthy as the user does?
Right. So we've been talking a lot about how identity is really important to zero trust. Kind of, it's I always describe it as an identity-centric approach to cybersecurity. But what happens in a zero trust model if somebody gets past the identity layer, if they're able to compromise it? What are some of the other things that are potentially in place to guard against bad things happening after that?
This is where I feel like it's kind of weird, because all the things that are in place, and I could be wrong with this, right? But that are in place once the user gets past, past the front door, they all come back to MFA to say, well, are you really who you say you are? And then, ironically, that's the same thing they used to get in the front door, so then what was the point, right? And then other than that, then you just deny access, right? So it's either shut everyone down, or accept the MFA again and just re-authenticate the user the same way they did, that they already got in the door, right? So I think there's a fundamental flaw there in some areas.
Well, so for zero trust, what I like to do is I like to microsegment the network, and in that I also like to put in place what I like to call a zero trust broker, but apparently Gartner likes to call it a SASE solution instead. Whatever. I feel like my characterization makes a lot more sense off the bat to normal people. And so in that zero trust broker, what I also like to implement is some sort of device level signal. So either that includes the past user history. So like either their IP addresses, or which if they're using a VPN, of course, it's the chicken and egg, you got to get on that VPN first, but or a cert that you put on whatever that device is, or something else, or even just like the time of day when the user generally logs in. If none of those match, then maybe we have an issue, right? Then the question is, well, how often do you revoke access for that? And so that's the issue that we have, right? So like, how do we get the SOC to decide that this is more important than that last time when they decided to log in at 2 a.m. because they were stressed out over a presentation?
Right, trying to get something critical done. So how do you separate out a legitimate anomaly from a nefarious anomaly?
Right.
And I just need to point out, Christine, the OMB said no more VPNs.
I know, I said VPN and I shouldn't have, because if you have a SASE, then you don't need a VPN. You're exactly right.
Right, we're about establishing relationships between the users and the applications as closely to each as we can. That lateral movement is really challenging. And I think one of the things we look at and think about is how do we let go of revocation and accelerate expiration. So if in the verify everything, validate everything for every transaction or every operation, it's going to be a while until we get down to that level for every data access. But when something changes access from one system to another, or as you said, a behavior pattern changes, expire the cert, try again. And if it's the same MFA, what are you gaining? If it's anchored to the device, then we've got some protections about being able to move around. This is a tough one. And how do you do that in a way that doesn't just destroy the user experience?
That's what I was thinking, right? Then you have friction, and the users just say, I'm done. Right?
Exactly. There's a trade-off there. The best security is no access.
Yeah, but I think there are reasons to have friction, and when you're not 100%, well, you're never going to be 100%, but when the risk score goes down, that's when you do have to introduce friction.
Exactly.
Right. All right, well, I think we got 1 minute left, so before I let you all go to the reception, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Brian, I'm curious about the platform authentication. I recently had a SIM swap attack of my phone, and I wish I had had that capability at the time, because I think it probably would have helped me. But I'd like to know a little bit more about how that would help somebody who is victimized.
Yeah, that is a great question. Counterfeit hardware or SIM swap, changing key pieces of it, can live sort of at the intersection. So I talked earlier about sort of trusted platform data and untrusted platform data. And Schneider Electric did a presentation earlier today where they talked about certificates and signing at every step of the process. And I think we're moving towards a world where devices, as they're built, as they're issued, are certified, and that certification can be transparent and can have a way, again, if we go back to that external verification, when your phone boots back up with a fraudulent SIM in it, it gets blocked or it gets downgraded. So we talk about step-up authentication. I see a world where we have step-down authorization when something's amiss. So maybe you can make emergency calls or do some operations, but not others.
All right. Yes. I think we are at time, so please give a round of applause to our excellent panel.
Thank you.
And if you got other questions, let's get something to drink and we'll talk about it out there. Thanks, everybody.